They say the corporate elite's biggest mistake is underestimating their enemies. Wrong. It is underestimating the person who cleans up their mess. $1 billion contract is not secured by flashy executives, but by people working 80 hours a week, by firing me via a cold email. They unknowingly pulled the pin on a grenade only I could defuse. Listen closely to how an entire tech empire evaporated simply because they threw away the wrong person. Hello and welcome back to Boss Revenge Stories. I want to sincerely thank all of you for your incredible support, but unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with zero budget to continue our operations here. Because of this harsh reality, we will absolutely have to stop uploading new videos on YouTube in the near future, and will transition our work entirely over to Patreon. If you find today's story engaging, please kindly support us by joining our Patreon community, where you can listen to even better, longer, and more detailed exclusive true stories that we simply cannot make public on YouTube, featuring multiple emotional voice actors bringing every scenario to life. You can easily join by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link located in the description or the pinned comment of this video. Now, let us dive right into the brutal corporate world of our protagonist, Madison Diaz. The air inside my Zurich hotel room tasted like stale espresso and pure anxiety. I was 32 years old, holding the title of Director of Compliance and Risk Analysis at Atheros Dynamics, a rapidly scaling tech firm out of Chicago. For exactly 3 days, I had not slept a single minute. The only things keeping my heart beating were dangerously high levels of caffeine and the sheer adrenaline of keeping a billion-dollar merger from collapsing. Atheros was trying to marry Vanguard Steel, a massive European clean energy and technology conglomerate. The problem was that Vanguard Steel operated with typical Swiss conservatism and held data privacy laws to a standard bordering on a religious doctrine. I was staring at screen after screen of complex legal frameworks, serving as the sole human barrier between my company and catastrophic legal failure. I was the only executive at Atheros who actually understood the grueling, restrictive clauses of the European Union General Data Protection Regulation. My superiors back in Chicago, a boys' club of slick executives who thought compliance was just a suggestion, constantly brushed off these regulations as trivial details. They wanted to harvest user data. Vanguard Steel wanted to protect it with their lives. Bridging that gap fell entirely on my shoulders. My phone screen glowed with a conference call. I was speaking with the Vanguard Steel legal team, meticulously negotiating the wording of a highly sensitive biometric data clause. We can agree to the localized server requirement, provided the encryption keys remain strictly within your jurisdiction, I said, my voice remarkably steady for someone running on fumes. The lead Swiss lawyer paused, then sighed in agreement. Very well, Madison, we accept those terms. Send the revised addendum. I ended the call. A massive wave of relief washed over me. I had done it. I had successfully closed the final legal loophole. The merger was safe. I reached for my mouse to send the updated files, but the cursor froze. A second later, my entire screen flashed blue, then went completely black. A small notification popped up in the center of the dark monitor. Session terminated. Access denied. I frowned. Assuming it was a temporary server glitch from the Chicago IT department, I picked up my phone to email the help desk, but a new message was already waiting in my personal inbox. It was not a message from IT. It was an automated email from the Atheros Human Resources portal. The subject line read, "Notice of Workforce Restructuring." The body of the email was completely devoid of humanity. It stated that my position was being eliminated effective immediately due to strategic realignment. I was instructed to return any company property and was explicitly forbidden from contacting any clients or partners. My corporate access had been revoked. I had been fired, mid-negotiation, through an automated server trigger. I sat there in the quiet room, the sound of the Zurich rain hitting the glass suddenly deafening. There was no phone call from the chief executive officer. There was no debriefing. There was not even a fake apology. I had spent months meticulously cleaning up their legal messes, working 80-hour weeks to ensure they did not accidentally commit corporate crimes on international soil, and they discarded me the exact second the heavy lifting was done, still numb. I opened the LinkedIn app on my phone. The algorithm immediately served me the answer I was looking for. Right at the top of my feed was a post from Logan. He was a newly appointed vice president at Ethos, a guy infamous for his reckless Silicon Valley mindset of moving fast and breaking things. His post featured a grinning selfie of him standing in the arrivals terminal of the Zurich International Airport. The caption was sickeningly enthusiastic. Just touched down in Switzerland to close the biggest deal in Ethos history. Time to wake up the European market. Move fast. Disrupt everything. He ended it with the hashtag #TechDisruption. The picture became perfectly clear. The board of directors did not want a compliance officer taking the credit for the most lucrative merger in the history of their company. They wanted their golden boy to step off the plane, shake hands for the cameras, and sign the finalized paperwork I had sacrificed my physical health to prepare. They fired me to clear the stage for him. I did not cry. I did not throw my laptop against the wall. I simply stood up, folded my clothes with mechanical precision, and packed my suitcase. I opened a travel app and booked the absolute cheapest economy flight back to Chicago. As I dragged my luggage out of the hotel lobby, a cold, sharp sense of clarity settled in my chest. They thought they had just secured their future by kicking me to the curb. What they failed to realize was that they had just handed the keys to a highly sensitive, legally explosive machine to a man who did not even know how to read the warning labels. I was not going to warn them. I was going to fly home in total silence and watch them burn. The silence of my Chicago apartment was heavy, a stark contrast to the relentless hum of the European financial capital I had just left behind. For 48 hours after my unceremonious termination, not a single executive from Ethos Dynamics reached out. There was no exit interview, no severance discussion, just a cowardly void. But while management pretended I no longer existed, my phone vibrated constantly. The loyal junior analysts and compliance officers I had trained over the past 3 years were quietly funneling me every internal memo and encrypted screenshot they could get their hands on. Through their covert messages, I watched the corporate propaganda machine shift into high gear. The internal newsletters were already hailing Logan as a visionary savior. He was the fresh blood they supposedly needed. The man bringing a much-needed dose of Silicon Valley disruption to the stagnant, traditional old world of European commerce. They painted my meticulous, agonizing legal frameworks as bureaucratic red tape that had been slowing the company down, while Logan was portrayed as the genius who would finally push the billion-dollar deal across the finish line. It was a masterclass in corporate delusion, and watching it unfold felt like observing a beautifully choreographed train wreck. Logan was not just taking over the final handshakes, he was actively dismantling everything I had built. One of my former risk assessors sent me a frantic text detailing how Logan had literally tossed my 200-page negotiation script into the recycling bin during his first prep meeting with the surviving team. He says we are pivoting to a comprehensive artificial intelligence integration strategy. My former subordinate texted, the panic evident even through the digital screen. He wants to pitch them on predictive user behavior models. I let out a harsh, dry laugh that echoed in the empty living room. Logan was entirely predictable. He was a man who spoke exclusively in buzzwords, a creature of empty confidence who believed aggressive posturing could override international law. His social media feeds confirmed every cynical thought I had about him. He was relentlessly documenting his Swiss crusade on his public profiles. There were photos of him holding massive steins of beer at upscale Zurich pubs, accompanied by captions mocking the stiff, conservative nature of Swiss billionaires. Time to show these old-school bankers how we do things in the States, he wrote under a picture of himself wearing a tailored vest and a smug grin. They are too obsessed with rules. We are here to awaken them. Move fast. Integrate everything. He was so blinded by his own ego that he had completely missed the fatal flaw in his grand strategy. By discarding my negotiation script, Logan had skipped the most crucial document of the entire merger: the privacy addendum. Vanguard Steel was not just a company. They were an institution that built their entire brand on the ethical handling of clean energy and user security. Their board of directors viewed data privacy not as a legal hurdle, but as a fundamental human right. Logan was planning to walk into a room full of Europe's most privacy-obsessed executives and propose a system designed to proactively scan and harvest user data to feed an artificial intelligence algorithm. Under the strict parameters of the European Union General Data Protection Regulation, and according to the internal ethical charters of Vanguard Steel, what he was about to propose was not just a bold business strategy, it was a literal crime. It was a massive, prosecutable violation of the exact terms I had just spent 3 sleepless nights finalizing. He was gearing up to hand them a signed confession of our intent to violate international privacy laws on day one. In a functional, healthy company, this would be the exact moment the ousted director picks up the phone, swallows her pride, and warns the board to stop the disaster. I could have called human resources. I could have sent a warning email to the chief executive officer. I could have saved them from themselves. Instead, I walked into my kitchen and reached for the top shelf. I pulled down a bottle of Kentucky bourbon I had been saving for a special occasion. I poured a generous measure into a heavy crystal tumbler, listening to the satisfying clink of the ice. I carried the drink over to my sofa, sat down, and propped my feet up on the coffee table. I took a slow, burning sip of the amber liquid, completely at peace with my decision. I was not going to say a single word. I was just going to sit back, enjoy my bourbon, and wait for the explosive shockwave to hit Chicago. The clock on my kitchen wall glowed a pale white, reading exactly 2 o'clock in the morning. Chicago was wrapped in a thick, icy fog, and the usual hum of traffic outside my window had faded into a tense, heavy silence. I was sitting in the dark, staring blankly at the city's skyline, my mind replaying the intricate webs of data privacy laws I'd spent the last year weaving. That was when my phone vibrated on the coffee table. It was a single, sharp buzz, not a standard text message, not an email. The screen illuminated with a notification from Signal, the highly encrypted messaging application heavily favored by privacy advocates, investigative journalists, and corporate whistleblowers alike. The sender was an unknown international number. I unlocked the screen, the stark white background of the chat window throwing harsh shadows across my face in the darkened living room. I am hoping this number still belongs to Madison Diaz. The first message read. A second message immediately followed. This is Elias. I sat up straight, the lingering warmth of the bourbon instantly evaporating from my system. Elias was the head of technology ethics at Vanguard Steel. He was a formidable, silver-haired Swiss executive who treated digital privacy with the reverence of a holy sacrament. For the past 8 months, Elias and I had engaged in brutal, exhausting intellectual warfare across dozens of mahogany conference tables. We had fought over every single comma, every localized server requirement, and every data retention clause in the compliance contracts. He was absolutely ruthless in his defense of European user data, and I was relentless in finding legal compromises that satisfied both our corporate mandates. Through that grueling crucible of negotiation, we had forged a silent, unbreakable mutual respect. He knew I was the only person at Aetheris Dynamics who actually took his ethical boundaries seriously. It is Madison, I typed back, my thumbs moving deliberately over the glass keyboard. I am reading you loud and clear. Elias, it is quite late here. What is the emergency? The typing indicator danced on the screen for what felt like an eternity. When his response finally came through, it was a torrent of barely contained professional outrage, transmitted across the Atlantic Ocean. The preliminary integration meetings today were a complete and utter farce, Elias wrote, his frustration palpable even through the encrypted text. Your new vice president treated our legal review like a casual fraternity mixer. He actively dodged every specific compliance question my team raised. He kept making terrible, condescending jokes about our rigid security infrastructure. He offered vague, unsubstantiated promises about algorithmic synergy and deep learning integration that made absolutely zero legal sense under our operating framework. I am experiencing a profound sense of alarm. Madison. I read the words slowly, visualizing Logan standing in their pristine, sterile boardroom, flashing his expensive veneered teeth and completely ignoring the delicate legal landmines buried under the floorboards. He was treating the most heavily regulated technology market on the planet like a reckless startup incubator. Another message from Elias appeared. This time, it cut straight to the bone, stripping away all corporate pleasantries. Why did you leave the project? Is this guy planning to sell out our customer data? I stared at that question for a long time. The ambient light of the street lamps below flickered through the window blinds. This was the ultimate crossroads. On one side lay the conditioned reflex of corporate loyalty, the deeply ingrained habit of protecting the company that paid your salary. Even after they brutally betrayed you, it would be so easy to give a diplomatic answer, to claim I moved on to other career ventures, to let Aetheris sink or swim on their own merits and walk away with clean hands. But Aetheris had not just fired me. They had erased my excruciating hard work and handed a loaded weapon to a fool. On the other side lay the cold, hard truth and the rare opportunity to balance the scales of justice. I chose the truth. I did not voluntarily leave the project. Elias, I replied, my keystrokes heavy and final. They fired me via an automated corporate email exactly 3 days ago. They wanted someone who would not let international ethics stand in the way of aggressive data mining. Logan has not read a single page of the privacy addendum we spent months negotiating. He intends to bypass the localized server requirements entirely and feed your clients' biometric profiles directly into an unrestricted artificial intelligence engine. The silence on the other end of the secure connection was profound. I could almost hear the gears turning in Zurich as Elias processed the sheer magnitude of the betrayal Aetheris was attempting to orchestrate under the guise of an American partnership. Then the merger is effectively dead. Elias finally responded, I will advise the board of directors to terminate all discussions immediately tomorrow morning. Do not do that, I typed back instantly. The dark thrill of the hunt suddenly ignited in my chest. A simple cancellation was not true justice. It was just a minor, explainable setback for the arrogant executives back in Chicago. I needed them to feel the full, devastating impact of their own hubris. I needed them to face a public execution. I want to help you, I wrote, my eyes narrowing at the glowing screen. I know every single vulnerability in the Aetheris data integration plan. I know exactly what Logan is going to try to hide from your board. Let me act as your unseen advisor from the shadows. I do not want any money. I do not want a consulting contract. I do not want official recognition. What do you want? Madison? Elias asked, his tone shifting from defensive outrage to calculated curiosity. I want you to give Logan enough rope to hang himself, I answered. Do not challenge him in the preliminary rounds. Let him feel entirely victorious. Let him believe his aggressive American tactics are successfully intimidating your team into submission. Keep smiling, keep nodding, and let him walk into the final presentation feeling like an untouchable conqueror. Let him freely showcase his grand vision to your entire board of directors. You want him to present the illegal data mining strategy on the official record, Elias concluded, instantly understanding the lethal, undeniable nature of the trap I was building. Exactly, I confirmed. I will draft the specific, highly technical questions you need to ask him after he finishes his presentation. Questions he cannot possibly answer without committing corporate perjury or openly admitting to a gross violation of European privacy law in front of your most conservative billionaires. This is ruthless, Madison, Elias replied. Even through the cold digital text, I could sense the grim, respectful satisfaction in his words. They wanted a disruption, I typed, setting the phone down on the table and letting the darkness wash over the room. We are going to give them a disruption. It was 9 o'clock in the morning in Zurich, which meant it was the dead of night in Chicago. I was sitting cross-legged on my living room floor, staring into the dark, with a single wireless earbud firmly pressed into my right ear. Elias had promised me a front row seat to the execution, and true to his word, he had dialed my number on a secure, encrypted audio line. He placed his phone face down on the massive oak table right in the center of the Vanguard steel boardroom. The audio quality was terrifyingly crisp. I could hear the faint, civilized clinking of porcelain espresso cups, the subtle rustle of expensive wool suits, and the low, intimidating murmur of the most powerful conservative billionaires in Europe waiting for the presentation to begin. Then, the heavy double doors swung open. The unmistakable, overly confident voice of Logan boomed into the room. He did not bother to read the temperature of the audience. He launched straight into his pitch with the arrogant, chaotic energy of a man who firmly believed he was gracing these old-world executives with a divine revelation. I closed my eyes and pictured him pacing the floor, likely wearing an aggressively modern suit, entirely oblivious to the stony, unamused expressions of his audience. "Gentlemen, the future does not wait for bureaucracy," Logan began, his voice dripping with rehearsed Silicon Valley charisma. "Aetherist Dynamics is not just bringing you a simple software upgrade today, we are bringing you a total disruption of the market. For the next 20 minutes, Logan dug his own grave with a silver shovel. I listened in absolute, vindictive bliss as he confidently projected slide after slide of pure legal poison. The climax of his presentation was exactly what Elias and I had anticipated. Logan proudly unveiled a strategic slide he titled, "Maximum Algorithmic Synergy." He boasted loudly about how Aetheris intended to completely bypass traditional, siloed data structures. By cross-mining the biometric data of your entire European customer base, we can feed our predictive artificial intelligence models with unprecedented speed, Logan declared, his voice echoing triumphantly in the silent room. We will analyze user energy consumption, physical presence markers, and daily behavioral patterns to maximize operational profit margins. It is a goldmine of unstructured data just waiting to be monetized. The silence that followed his grand proclamation was not the silence of awe. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of absolute horror. In the European Union, biometric data is considered a highly restricted, special category of personal data, guarded by the fiercest privacy laws on the planet. Logan had just cheerfully proposed a systemic, continent-wide violation of fundamental human rights as if it were a brilliant marketing strategy. I could hear the distinct sound of a leather-bound folder being closed. It was a sharp, final sound. Then, Elias stood up. The scraping of his chair against the hardwood floor sounded exactly like a judge bringing down a gavel. "Mr. Logan," Elias began, his voice dangerously calm and laced with a thick, uncompromising Swiss accent. "That is certainly an ambitious vision. However, the board requires technical clarity on 3 specific points before we proceed." I leaned forward, holding my breath. This was it, the script I had written. "First," Elias stated, "under Article 9 of the General Data Protection Regulation, how exactly does Aetheris Dynamics plan to secure explicit, unbundled consent for the cross-mining of biometric markers without violating the strict necessity principle?" I heard Logan swallow hard. The sensitive microphone picked up the nervous, erratic shuffling of his feet. "Well, Elias, we believe in a frictionless user experience," Logan stammered, the false bravado instantly draining from his voice as he scrambled for footing. "We will embed the consent architecture deep within the terms of service update. That is standard industry practice. Standard in America, perhaps, but a criminal offense here," Elias countered smoothly, not giving him an inch to breathe. "Which brings me to my second question. Regarding your artificial intelligence engine, please explain your technical architecture for compliance with the sovereign data residency mandate. When a European user invokes their right to be forgotten, how will your predictive models retroactively unlearn the behavioral data harvested from that specific individual without collapsing the entire neural network?" Logan's breathing became ragged and audible through the open line. This was a concept far beyond his comprehension. He was a marketing guy playing dress-up in a compliance world, and he had just been exposed. And finally, Elias delivered the fatal blow, his voice ringing with absolute, crushing authority. Given that Vanguard Steel operates critical clean energy infrastructure, how does your aggressive data extraction protocol shield our national grid from the third-party surveillance liabilities outlined in the updated European Cybersecurity Act? The boardroom was dead silent. I could practically smell the panic radiating from Logan across the Atlantic Ocean. He was completely out of his depth, drowning in a sea of regulatory terminology he had never bothered to learn because he thought it was just trivial red tape. "Listen, guys," Logan finally squeaked out, a nervous, high-pitched chuckle escaping his tight throat. "We do not need to get bogged down in the technical weeds today. Our engineering team is world-class. We will remain agile, and we will solve all of those minor compliance details flexibly later on. The important thing right now is the vision." "Flexibly later," repeated the chairman of Vanguard Steel. His voice sounded like grinding stone. "You intend to build a billion-dollar partnership on the promise that you will figure out how not to commit corporate espionage flexibly later." The sound of a dozen heavy folders snapping shut echoed through my earbud. It was a symphony of destruction. "Mr. Logan," the chairman continued, his tone devoid of any warmth, "Vanguard Steel does not do business with reckless amateurs. We consider your proposal a profound insult to our ethical standards. The dinner gala tonight is canceled. In fact, all negotiations are suspended indefinitely. We are done here. Show yourself out." The fallout was instantaneous and apocalyptic. The moment Vanguard Steel officially notified the regulatory commissions of the suspended talks, the news leaked to the financial press. By the time the opening bell rang at the New York Stock Exchange, the bloodbath had begun. The market hates uncertainty, but it absolutely despises legal liability. Ethirus Dynamics stock went into freefall. In the first 30 minutes of the morning trading session, the share price plummeted. It did not just dip, it evaporated. A staggering 30% of the company's total market value was wiped out before the executives in Chicago even had time to finish their morning coffees. My phone began lighting up with news alerts. Major financial outlets were running breaking news banners with massive, bold headlines. I watched a prominent financial analyst on live television declare it the biggest tech ethics scandal of the decade. They reported that Ethirus Dynamics was caught attempting to force illegal biometric surveillance onto European partners. Panic selling gripped the institutional investors. Millions of shares were dumped onto the open market in a desperate, screaming frenzy to escape the blast radius of the collapsing deal. Meanwhile, the so-called visionary vice president completely folded under the pressure. Logan locked every single one of his social media accounts, turning his profiles private in a frantic attempt to hide the arrogant photos he had posted just days prior. He barricaded himself inside his luxury hotel room in Zurich, refusing to answer calls from the international press or even his own company. Back in Chicago, the corporate headquarters descended into absolute madness. The board of directors was paralyzed by sheer terror. They were no longer just worried about a failed merger. They were staring down the barrel of a massive federal nightmare. Whispers were already circulating loudly that the Federal Trade Commission was preparing to launch a full-scale investigation into Ethirus for fraudulent investor commitments and deceptive data practices. They had fired the only person who knew how to disarm the bomb, and now they were trapped in the room while the timer hit 0. The weekend arrived with a quiet, heavy rain washing over the Chicago streets. I was in my kitchen, boiling water for a pot of Earl Grey tea. The frantic energy of the past week had entirely dissolved, replaced by a profound, chilling stillness. The balance of power in my life had fundamentally shifted, and I was simply waiting for the final confirmation. It came exactly at 7 o'clock on a Sunday evening. My phone vibrated on the marble countertop. The caller identification displayed the name Marcus. He was the chief executive officer of Ethirus Dynamics, the man whose digital signature had authorized my termination just days prior. Under normal circumstances, a chief executive never calls a terminated employee. The legal department explicitly forbids it. The fact that he was calling me directly, on a weekend, from his personal cellular device, told me everything I needed to know. The fortress had crumbled. I let it ring 3 times. I poured the hot water over the tea leaves, watching the dark amber color slowly bleed into the water. Then, I picked up the phone and accepted the call. "Madison," Marcus said. His voice was a jarring mixture of forced corporate warmth and suffocating panic. It lacked the booming, untouchable authority he usually commanded in the boardroom. "Thank goodness you answered. How are you holding up?" "I am perfectly fine, Marcus," I replied. My tone was entirely flat, devoid of any anger or resentment. I was speaking to a ghost. "Listen, Madison, we need to talk," he began, his words tumbling out in a rushed, frantic cadence. "There has been a colossal misunderstanding, a terrible, catastrophic lack of judgment on our end. I want to apologize to you, personally, and on behalf of the entire board of directors." I walked over to the armchair by the window, holding my teacup. "Go on." For the next 10 minutes, Marcus delivered a masterclass in pathetic desperation. I did not interrupt him once. I simply sat there, taking slow, deliberate sips of my tea, letting him drown in his own words. He immediately threw his hand-picked golden boy under the bus. He blamed the entire international incident on Logan, attributing the disaster to the youthful impulsiveness and gross incompetence of a new vice president who had gone completely rogue. "He did not respect the groundwork you laid." "Madison," Marcus pleaded, his voice cracking slightly. I could hear the faint sound of his shoes pacing rapidly across a hardwood floor. He was terrified. "We trusted the wrong person. He completely bypassed our internal review protocols. We have already suspended him, and the legal team is preparing to terminate his contract for cause. But the damage is severe. The market is slaughtering us. The institutional investors are demanding blood. The federal regulators are already circling like sharks. If we cannot get Vanguard Steel back to the negotiating table by Wednesday morning, we are looking at total insolvency." Chapter 11. Bankruptcy. Aetheris will not survive the month. He took a ragged breath, transitioning seamlessly from making excuses to begging for salvation. "You are the only one who understands the European privacy framework," Marcus continued, his tone growing more frantic. "You are the only person Elias actually respects. We need you back. Madison, I am prepared to offer you the title of special advisor to the board. We will bypass human resources entirely. I will authorize a massive signing bonus right now, and we will rewrite your employment contract at exactly triple your previous salary. Whatever resources you need, whatever executive authority you want, it is yours. Name your price. Just tell me you will come back and fix this mess." He finally stopped talking. The silence stretched across the cellular network. He was panting, exhausted by his own desperate performance. He had laid all his cards on the table, begging the woman he had treated like garbage to save his empire from turning to ash. I took one final sip of my tea. It was perfectly steeped, warm, comforting, and entirely grounded. "Marcus," I said gently, my voice radiating an absolute, untouchable calm. "I appreciate the generous offer. I really do. And under different circumstances, I would love to help you." I paused, letting the false hope hang in the air for a fraction of a second before I severed the cord entirely. "But unfortunately, I am currently bound by a very strict non-compete clause," I continued smoothly. "You see, I officially became the North American Director of Strategy for Vanguard Steel this morning. Elias thought my understanding of compliance was highly valuable to their upcoming expansion plans." The absolute dead silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was not a pause. It was a vacuum. I could practically hear the oxygen leaving his lungs as the realization washed over him. There was no anger left in me. No need to yell or gloat. The execution was completely bloodless. He was a man standing on the trapdoor, and I had just casually pulled the lever. I did not wait for a response. I calmly pressed the red button, ending the call, and left the chief executive officer sitting alone in the dark to chew on the death sentence of his own career. 3 months is an eternity in the corporate technology sector. Over the course of exactly 90 days, Aetheris Dynamics bled out on the public stage, The failed European merger was merely the initial puncture wound. The subsequent class action lawsuits from furious shareholders and the relentless, suffocating investigations by the Federal Trade Commission served as the prolonged killing blow. Their stock price did not just hit rock bottom, it burrowed entirely beneath it. The once arrogant tech empire was rapidly reduced to a distressed asset bleeding millions of dollars in legal fees every single week. That was when Vanguard Steel finally struck. It was no longer a partnership or a friendly merger. It was a textbook hostile takeover. The Swiss conglomerate swooped in and acquired the entire American company for absolute pennies on the dollar, picking the corporate carcass clean. The day of the official transition arrived with a bitter, biting Chicago chill. Inside the sprawling glass walls of the Atheris executive boardroom, the atmosphere was suffocating. The entire old guard, the remaining board of directors, and the surviving senior vice presidents sat rigidly in their high-backed ergonomic chairs. They looked exactly like prisoners awaiting a firing squad. They were nervously waiting for the proxy representative from their new Swiss parent company to arrive and officially dictate their collective fate. The air in the room was thick with the smell of stale coffee and a profound, inescapable dread. Precisely at 10 o'clock in the morning, the heavy frosted glass doors glided open. I stepped into the room. I was wearing a meticulously tailored charcoal suit, and pinned perfectly to my left lapel was the platinum insignia of the Vanguard Steel Executive Committee. Trailing immediately behind me was a phalanx of 3 ruthless corporate attorneys carrying heavy leather briefcases, ready to officially purge the corrupt system. The collective gasp in the room was highly audible. Eyes widened in sheer disbelief. Jaws tightened. I could see the exact moment the blood completely drained from the faces of the men who had once considered me a disposable asset. I walked slowly down the length of the massive mahogany table. The only sound in the dead quiet room was the sharp, authoritative click of my heels against the polished, hardwood floor. I reached the head of the table, the designated seat of absolute corporate power. It was the exact chair Marcus had occupied for years. I smoothed my jacket and sat down, gracefully lacing my fingers together and letting my cold gaze slowly sweep across the terrified executives. I made a point to hold eye contact with every single one of them, forcing the crushing reality of the new corporate hierarchy to settle deep into their bones. There was no shouting, there was no theatrical villain monologue, no slamming of fists, and absolutely no cheap gloating. True power does not ever need to raise its voice. I reached into the leather folder handed to me by my lead attorney and pulled out a single, crisp document. I placed it directly in the center of the table. It was the official corporate restructuring mandate. "Good morning, gentlemen," I said, my voice smooth, remarkably polite, and completely devoid of warmth. As the newly appointed Director of Strategy for the North American Division of Vanguard Steel, I have been officially tasked with optimizing the operational efficiency of this newly acquired subsidiary. I tapped my index finger twice against the thick paper. "This is the immediate termination list," I continued, looking directly into the pale, sweating face of the former Chief Executive Officer. "Effective as of this exact minute, Marcus, your services are no longer required in any capacity. You will find Logan's name right below yours. Our security personnel are currently clearing out both of your executive offices as we speak. You have exactly 10 minutes to surrender your corporate credentials, hand over your devices, and exit the building." It was a flawless, absolute knockout. The final blow was executed politely, terrifyingly cold, and strictly bound by the highest legal authority. As the disgraced leaders stood up in absolute, humiliating defeat, I leaned back in my chair and watched them silently walk toward the exit. The billion-dollar mistake they made was not just firing the right person at the worst possible time. It was failing to realize that the most perfect, devastating revenge is never simply about destroying your enemies. It is about surviving their betrayal, climbing the very ladder they tried to push you off, and ultimately, returning as their absolute master. Thank you so very much from the bottom of my heart for tuning in and listening to my story on Boss Revenge Stories. I would absolutely love to know where in the world you are listening from today, so please leave a comment down below. If you found today's story engaging and satisfying, please be aware that our channel will absolutely not be uploading new videos here on YouTube in the near future. We are transitioning our work entirely over to Patreon due to our recent demonetization. Please kindly help us keep these incredible narratives alive by joining our Patreon channel. There, you can listen to the absolute best, highly detailed, exclusive true stories that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can join our community right now by scanning the QR code on your screen or by using the Patreon link provided in the description and the pinned comment section of this video. Thank you once again for your incredible support, and we cannot wait to see you over on Patreon.